Good evening, folks, family, friends, loved ones, enemies, frenemies, wizards, witches, muggles, mudbloods, people of Middle Earth to another episode of Disguise Coverage, the only podcast in existence that gives you an equal amount of blueberries in each muffin. I'm your host, Anthony Prohaska. Find me on Twitter at pro__ant. That's pro, two underscores, ANT. Give me a follow on the old Twitter. Find me on TikTok under the exact same handle as well, pro, two underscores, ANT. In tonight's episode of Disguise Coverage, we are going to dive into week 3 of Bills OTAs, following along in the same form and fashion as we have the previous 2 weeks when we dove into week 1 of Bills OTAs and week 2 of Bills OTAs. Again, the idea and the theme of it being this is the time of year where everybody is just looking for anything and everything football related. I mean, it's the reason the match did so well, just watching. Oh, what's up, Jason? How you doing? Thank you for joining me. It's the reason why people watched 4 quarterbacks play golf last week, Wednesday at this time. People are hungry for football, action, information, anything like that. Hey, Sophia, how you doing? People want football. They want that action. But because of that, you get a lot of fluff. You get a lot of propaganda at this time of year, whether it's from beat reporters or just content in general. And there's a lot to sift through. You know, we've got press conferences, we've got practices, and it can be hard to tell what is real, what is not, what's important, what's a gem, what's just information, what's fluff, what's propaganda. So much like the last 2 weeks, we're going to dive into this week of OTAs and really focus on the biggest takeaways from practice and from press conferences from both players and coaches to really put together a picture and piece of what the rest of this offseason will look like, but more importantly, what the 2022 regular season will look like and potentially beyond based on some of the things we're going to dive into tonight. And let's change the banner right there. Fantastic. And that's the theme for this show. I would hope that was everybody's thought coming into it, seeing the name of this episode being Buffalo Bills OTAs week 3. And you know how what we like to do here on the show before we dive into the content. I want to throw up love for the sponsor on the show, One Pie Pizza, the best pizza in Buffalo, hands down, stamp of approval, official, all of that. Great people making great pizza, delicious sweet sauce pie, fantastic cheese to sauce ratio, cup and char pepperoni. They do a lot of initiatives and drives for the community, for charities, for different organizational groups. They are genuinely good people making genuinely great food. Go get yourself some One Pie Pizza. Treat yourself and the family and your loved ones, all that stuff. The online menu can be found in the episode show notes down below, whether you are watching here on YouTube, listening on one of the podcasting apps or platforms. The online menu can be found, again, in the episode show notes. Click it, go to it, go through it, all of that good stuff. And as always, before we, really start to dive into tonight, what I always like to mention, you guys know the drill by now, well, most of you do, we like to make the show as engaging as possible. So any thoughts, questions, comments, concerns, philosophies, ideologies, maxims, anything like that, anything that you got, throw it up into the chat, questions, whatever you want to do. I love the engagement between everybody in the chat. I love the engagement with everybody live, and our back and forth banter and everything. So whatever you got, I appreciate you guys for being here, riding with me live. And if you got anything, throw it up in the chat. I see a couple things that have already peeked through. Jason says, "Hey, Ant, did you hear anything about the Bills going back to the 80s and 90s gear for games this year?" I have heard that the Bills will be bringing back the 90s style helmets. I can't officially confirm or give up a source or anything like that. I have heard some pretty significant details and rumblings that the Bills will be bringing back that helmet. And then what I would assume is that 90s uniform as a potential alternate uniform this year, which I think would be awesome. I've been clamoring for it. I really want those Bills 90s jerseys and uniform as an alternate. Give me those Jim Kelly, Thurman Thomas, Bruce Smith, Buffalo Bills uniforms as an alternate. There's certain uniforms that I really just want to see in the NFL. I want those Bills ones. I want the Tampa Bay Buccaneers creamsicle ones. I want the Philadelphia Eagles, Randall Cunningham ones with that lighter green and the silver eagle on the side. Give me the Steve Largent, Jim Zorn, Seattle Seahawks uniforms. I'm really excited for the NFL changing that helmet rule, which allows teams to have another helmet besides their primary one, which in turn connects to potential uniform combinations and jersey alternates, which I'm very, very, very excited for, not just for the Bills, but for a lot of other teams in the NFL, like I just mentioned. But yes, I have heard some significant noise that the Bills will be using that red helmet this year or potentially in the future. So I think it's just a matter of time before we get that. What's up, Ron? Appreciate you being here. And also appreciate you shouting out the analogy, the rock, paper, scissors analogy that I have kind of used as my unofficial mantra this year and this off season. It's just so applicable to so many things that we talk about. But yeah, rock, paper, scissors. I should just change the name of the show to rock, paper, scissors. That's how popular it's become at this point. Hey, Steven, what's up? Jason, you're a constant supporter of the tree. Every week, whether it's in the film room, whether it's here on Disguise coverage, you are tremendously appreciative of the tree. And yeah, I'm going to put it on the comments so we can see. It does look like it's glowing. The lights really enhance, I think, the yellow garland, or maybe the garland brings out more in the lights. I don't know. Also got a little yellow lantern going on over there that's turned on, a little extra light. Got a whole vibe going on here on Disguise coverage as we move into the summer months. And we've chosen yellow for this June month and the theme for the tree and overall. Oh, and Jason says the red splash outfits with the red helmets would be cool. I don't know. I'll take anything with the red helmets. The all red might be a little too much for me. What I do want to see is white jerseys with red pants. I wanted to see that for forever, ever since I was little and I saw like a 90s Pro Bowl card of Steve Atwater and Steve Tasker rocking those AFC Pro Bowl uniforms that were the white jerseys with the red numbers and the red pants. I always just thought I'd love to see some more red in the Bills. And they do the color rush. You know, we get the red top and the red pants. And I've seen a lot of people talk about the potential red jersey and white pants. I would love to see red pants, white jersey. Could stay with the white helmet, could be with the red helmet. I don't know. Maybe mix and match, whatever gets the job done. I'm excited for the jersey possibilities and potential that we could see from the Buffalo Bills, because these ones are great. I think there's no denying that. Every time I mention the potential of alternate helmets or jerseys, there's a lot of like backlash of saying that there's absolutely nothing wrong with the Bills jerseys right now. And there's not. I love the Bills jerseys. I think they're fantastic as they are right now, but it's fun to have an alternate. I love the Sabres jerseys right now. I really want the goat head as an alternate, black and white, preferably, although I know they're only going to get one. But yeah, it doesn't hurt to shake it up a little bit every now and again. Baseball question from Steven. Steven says, quick baseball question. If the Red Sox get eliminated, you're cheering for the Jays over the Yankees, right? Absolutely. I am cheering for every team in baseball over the Yankees, except I go back and forth now with the Astros. I strongly dislike them, but yeah, it's my favorite team is the Boston Red Sox, and my second favorite team is whoever is playing the Yankees. That's pretty much how it is, standard fare. What else? No, Sophie, I did not see the clip of Josh at OTAs doing a little dance and then a hook shot pass, but he's extremely comfortable. He's the leader of that team. And it's good to see him always in high spirits, especially at this time of year. And especially knowing the chip that he operates with on his shoulder and how serious he takes the game. So to see him still operate with that levity and that brevity is really good to see. Oh, Jason says they need to make some blue helmets. If someone can do graphic design and put together a blue helmet, I think that would be pretty cool. I'd be down for that. But as I start to work our way through the comments, we start to shift here towards the first topic on tonight's episode of Buffalo Bills OTAs Week 3. And the biggest one I had, again, that's why it's the first topic, Leslie Frazier, Buffalo Bills defensive coordinator, speaking on the Buffalo Bills defense. He went into a decent amount of depth when it came to talking about several of the players and some overall scheme talks, overall, position grouping conversations. And the first thing I wanted to bring up really was him hitting on Von Miller. He was asked right out of the gate pretty early on about Von Miller's snap share and Von Miller's snap percentage. So as we know, the Buffalo Bills, they love to rotate amongst their defensive line. The Bills were one of only 7 teams last year who didn't have a defensive lineman with more than 60% of the snaps. Ed Oliver led the team in snap share last year, and they don't get a ton of total snaps. Again, we know this. Sean McDermott, Leslie Frazier, they like to rotate the defensive line. They like to keep guys fresh in the fourth quarter. You compare that to Von Miller, who is a guy who is seemingly always on the field for the Denver Broncos when healthy in his career. And then you go back to what Von Miller was last year for the Los Angeles Rams, and in 2021, so again, this past season, regular season and postseason, Von Miller was 7th amongst all edges in snaps, regular season and postseason, which would be very significant for the Buffalo Bills. I put a tweet out earlier in reference to it as I pull it up now. So again, Von Miller, 7th most snaps amongst all edges in 2021 with 939. Jerry Hughes was the closest Bills edge with 624. And if you want to focus just on regular season, because Von had 2 extra playoff games versus Jerry Hughes and against or versus a lot of other players as well. Von Miller, regular season only, 25th amongst all edges in snaps with 762. Jerry Hughes again led the Bills. He was 52nd with 557. And then you put that together with some of the numbers and things that Leslie Frazier talked about. And Frazier talked about it directly. He talked about Von Miller first, alluding to how much he has left in the tank, saying that he still shows flashes of being a premier pass rusher and he has a lot left in the tank. And then he was asked about that snap count and that snap share piece. And he came right out and said it. And he said, Von Miller is referencing his prior numbers and snap counts. He said, quote, they're way up in comparison to how we rotate defensive linemen. And he again drilled home and emphasized that point of wanting Von Miller to be fresh in the fourth quarter. And also, again, ended with continuing our rotation system so we can see our guys be the best that they can be in the fourth quarter. That rotation is going to continue. Von Miller, I would expect Von Miller to get more than 60% of the snaps in Buffalo. Granted, there's also game script that factors into those things too. Are the Bills up? Is the game, not even close in the fourth quarter? And so you're pulling starters at certain positions and letting guys rest and taking your foot off the gas a little bit. Like that'll play into snap share and snap counts and all that stuff. But I expect that rotation to continue. This is one of the most interesting things to look forward to for me this year is how the Bills manage that snap share. We've seen Sean McDermott in the past when he's had premier guys give them, especially in Carolina, give them more snaps and more share. But if the Bills are feeling confident in their other players, that's the biggest thing. We're going to see that rotation. We're going to see it regardless. That is a philosophical belief for Sean McDermott and Leslie Frazier. They want players fresh in the fourth quarter when offensive linemen have been in there every single snap on the offense and maybe they're wearing down a little bit. Maybe they're a little winded. Maybe they're a little gassed. Maybe they're tired. And you keep rotating bodies like you have all game. You've got a fresh group of horses to really run and go after and make plays in the fourth quarter. That is a philosophical belief for Leslie Frazier and Sean McDermott. You add somebody like Von Miller, who the Bills have not had a premier pass rushing threat like that under Sean McDermott in this tenure. They have not had it. Jerry Hughes is better than people think. They had Kyle Williams for a bit, but Von Miller is on a whole nother level. And Von Miller, like we mentioned, whether it was last year with Los Angeles or his non-injury years in Denver, he gets a ton of snaps. He gets a ton of snap share. He's a guy who is big on building a rhythm and attacking offensive linemen early in games and kind of poking and prodding a little bit to figure out what moves he can use in the third and fourth quarter, to figure out what he can do to succeed later on in the game when it comes crunch time and it comes time to be a closer and make those plays. So snap share it's not just from like I want to be on the field all the time. It's part of Von Miller's game. Like he uses every single snap to put together a sample size and figure out how to attack the offensive lineman in front of him. And he pairs it together with what he's done all week in prep and putting together a package and figuring out how to attack and how to really work against an opponent. And then again, he takes all that prep work and all that film study and he puts it together with what he's seeing in real time during the games and he attacks later in the game. Von Miller is still going to get his snaps. Leslie Frazier said it as much, they're not worried about it. They're on the same page. He also mentioned that they talked about that when signing Von Miller. I think that was a very interesting thing that Leslie Frazier said, because again, Von's prior numbers from a snap share perspective are drastically different than what snap share numbers look like for the Bills defensive linemen. So Leslie Frazier speaking about that, I think that was very transparent. And I also think it makes a lot of sense. I think that was something that was addressed probably right away amongst Brandon Beane and Sean McDermott and Leslie Frazier. Like, okay, we're going to give Von Miller. We want to give Von Miller. What does his snap share look like? How comfortable are we giving him A or B or X or Y or Z? And then speaking with Von Miller and seeing, okay, how comfortable are you with X amount of snaps? Okay, what about Y amount of snaps and Z amount and so on and so forth? I think they had a dialogue before Von signed. I think there's an expectation and an understanding between the coaching staff and Von Miller. So I don't expect this to be an issue where, like, we're seeing a story in October where it's like, Von Miller upset about snap share or upset with not seeing as many snaps, yada, yada. I don't expect to see that. I think they are on the same page. But that being said, I do think we're going to continue to see that rotation. I don't think Von Miller's going to come out and see 75% of the snaps or 79% of the snaps. I think over 60 is a reasonable expectation, and somewhere in that 65 to 70 range, depending on game script and opponent and what's happening in certain games, because all those things factor in when you're looking at total snaps and counts at the end of the year. But Von's going to be a guy they want to get on the field, but that belief in rotation and keeping guys fresh, that is a philosophical piece that is integral to Sean McDermott and Leslie Frazier. So that's going to continue. How much it affects Von Miller, we'll see. But again, it's also going to be tied into how effective can the young guys be, which is something that Leslie Frazier also spoke about. He came out and said, flat out, blankly, almost, as much as with as much transparency as Sean McDermott had in week one, talking about Gregory Rousseau, AJ Epinesa, and Carlos Basham. And Frazier came out and said point blank that they need to see consistency from Rousseau, AJ, and Basham, and they need to know what they can expect from them every time they walk on the field. And, he said this in talking about all three guys. He said, quote, "You need to not be concerned how is he going to practice today, or how is he going to perform in the game on Sunday." Those are questions that they have on all three of those guys. They go out and, maybe a little less with Rousseau, considering how he performed in his rookie year, especially against the run. But those are fair questions to have amongst the coaching staff and the front office about these young guys. What are you going to get out of AJ Epinesa every day and every week? What are you going to get out of Carlos Basham? What are you going to get out of Gregory Rousseau, especially from a pass rush perspective? I've said it multiple times on the show and throughout this offseason. Gregory Rousseau's rookie year against the run was tremendous. His pass rush plan, his pass rush package, his moves, his counters, everything. That's still very much a work in progress, which is not an insult or thing to bring him down. He's still very green and raw at that position. But from a pass rush perspective, who is going to be the other threat opposite of Von Miller on the edge? I've stated again multiple times, Ed Oliver is the best pass rusher on this Bills defensive line aside from Von Miller. Who takes the mantle at edge? Who is the other guy who plays off that other side, who gets those one-on-one matchups and takes advantage of them? I think that also impacts the snap share and snap count for Von Miller, because if you're more confident in Basham and Groot and Epinesa, you feel more comfortable eking out that rotation. If they're not getting after it, you almost have to play Von Miller. Your hand is more forced because you're sitting there being like, well, we got to get pass rush, and he's the only guy that can do it, so we have to continue to play this guy. That's also going to affect things as well. And Leslie Frazier calling it out right away, right after talking about Von Miller's snap share and calling out Groot and Epinesa and Boogie, much like Sean McDermott did when McDermott said they have to step up and contribute in a primary fashion, not just a secondary role. That's a very fair part. I think that's a big piece that is going to impact what we see from Von Miller this year in terms of how much he's on the field. Is, do they have to leave him on the field? Can they afford to be like, no, it's cool, come off, we got other guys who can make plays? Or is it like, no, he has to stay out there because we have no other option? That's going to be a big piece. Some other interesting nuggets and tidbits that Frazier said about Von Miller. He talked about the flexibility that Von Miller has in terms of being able to rush from both the left and right side. He said they expect Von Miller to play some left and right because he's proven he can be effective at both. Also talked about Gregory Rousseau being primarily more on the left side of the defense, which I thought was interesting. And they talked about how key that flexibility is. Frazier said, quote, "The flexibility he gives us allows us to really utilize some of our young talent in a positive way. And they'll use that flexibility to their advantage." And I thought, again, that's straightforward, but I think that's something that really hasn't been talked about because Von can work from both the left and right side. That gives the other edge players the opportunity to work on whatever side they're most comfortable. So if you've got a guy who's only good on the right, cool, just put Von on the left. If you've got a guy who's only good on the left, cool, put Von to the right. Combine that with being able to play the matchups. And if okay, this rookie right tackle but there's a backup at some spot, you want Von to take advantage of that matchup, you can line him up wherever you want or line him up against the best offensive lineman, because Von can still probably beat that best tackle and let one of the young guys or one of the secondary or third or tertiary or fourth guys work against that quote unquote weaker offensive tackle. You can play with the matchups. You have that flexibility because of what Von Miller provides you, being able to line up on both sides of the edge and being able to rush equally well and being equally effective on both sides, which was a nice piece as well. And some other things staying on that defensive line. Leslie Frazier talked about how mental at this point of OTAs are. You can't work as hard as you like at the physical because the competitive part is reduced with trying to reduce live contact without your pads on. So everything now is about developing trust and chemistry and laying the foundation through fundamentals, which was very key and very spot on from Mr. Frazier. And Frazier also spoke a little bit on Kaiir Elam. Before we get into Kaiir Elam, I want to backtrack a bit and pull on some of the comments. Jason says, I don't remember seeing all, in reference to the Bills defensive line rotations, I don't remember seeing all that freshness making much of a difference yet. I think a lot of that is muddied. I said this on Twitter today too, because someone made a similar comment. I think that thought is muddied by the Bills not getting home in big games, specifically in the playoffs against Patrick Mahomes and the Chiefs. If you look at the Bills' pressure numbers, if you look at the Bills' sack numbers, they were 12th in sacks last year, which isn't bad by any means. And if they get home a little more, they're in the top 10. They're one of the best pressure-generating teams in football last year. And then if you want to go into like advanced metrics even further, like Football Outsiders, and look at adjusted sack rate and things like that, they were in the top 10. I believe they were 7th. They're not as bad of a pressure team as you think. And that freshness plays in. You have guys who are able to get after it more effectively because they're fresher, because they have more juice in their legs later in the game. But I will say, if you're not an effective pass rusher, having the freshest legs in the world isn't going to matter, because if you can't get to the quarterback when you're fresh, then all that freshness is for nothing. It means nothing. But don't discount the rotation that we've seen. And also don't discount what the Bills defensive line did last year. I know they didn't bring down Mahomes in the divisional round and they left some sacks on the table throughout the year. But on the whole, this was a unit that generated a consistent amount of pressures. And again, weren't too terrible at sacks, finishing 12th on the year. Granted, a decent amount of those came, a handful of those came in a couple games, but we will see. Oh, comment here from Jason. Tremaine Edmonds saying he's going to earn that extension contract in an interview this morning. I'm glad he's going to show out. Yeah, he mentioned a couple pieces on the contract in OTAs when he spoke yesterday. He was asked several times, is it in the forefront of your mind? How easy is it to practice and play knowing that the contract extension is on the table? And is that something you're thinking about? And he gave a lot of coach speak at OTAs. He really kind of brushed everything off and just talked about getting better and being a part of the team and learning and growing and progressing and everything like that. And yes, awesome comment here, Jason. Everybody smash that like button. Appreciate you guys. Likes are tremendously important towards helping myself and the entire Cover One team to track and trend in front of more eyes and ears. So while you are here watching live, or if you're watching later, whatever have you, please drop a like on this video here on YouTube. Or if you're listening on one of any of the podcasting apps or platforms, please drop a review and a subscription while you're at it. Please and thank you. Appreciate you guys. Good comment here from Steven. Steven says 62% of the snaps can look very different if they're in games when the Bills are way ahead. He only sees 45%. That's a huge piece, right? You might look and be like, man, how come he didn't play this past game? It's like, well, the Bills won like 37-10, so he didn't really play the fourth quarter. Huge piece. Huge piece. Comment here from Ron saying that Shaq is a nice backup plan. I'm very interested to see how Shaq Lawson is used. He offers you a known quantity on that defensive line in terms of his run stopping ability. He sets a solid edge. He's physical. He's violent. He's good at, one gapping, but he can also play a bit of a gap and a half. And again, he's stout and strong at the point of attack. He gives you a nice chess piece against the run. And he offers you not a ton of pass rush upside, but he's a guy who can get you 4 to 6 sacks depending on how well things fall in his favor. I think he also gives you the opportunity to play some different games up front in terms of your alignment. He's a guy who can line up in a 4-eye just on the inside shoulder there of the offensive tackle and do some different things and affect the gap work of the offensive line and affect double teams. And if the Bills continue to go with light boxes like we have seen traditionally under Sean McDermott and Leslie Frazier, Shaq Lawson might be an integral piece to the Bills defensive line because of what he offers from a strength at the point of attack perspective and what he does against the run and how he allows you to play the run with less defenders potentially in the box. So I'm very interested to see what we get from Shaq. Steven mentions Basham's comments this week. Woof. We are going to get into that for sure with Mr. Basham's comments. Awesome comment from Chris. Chris saying, I can't wait to see the D-line in action. I'm very excited. I'm excited and anxious. Like, I just want to see them. I just want to see them in action. I want to see what the rotation looks like. I want to see what the functionality looks like. You have a premier player in Von Miller. And I also like the rest of the additions. I like DaQuan Jones. I like Tim Settle. I like bringing back Shaq Lawson and Jordan Phillips, guys who are excited to be here and want to be here and can function in the system and saw their best years in this scheme and in this system. So very interested to see how this Bills D-line plays out. And again, we've seen so much investment in the Bills defensive line, monetarily, draft resources and allocation. Rousseau is a first-round pick. Epinesa is a second. Boogie Basham is a second. We've seen money spent year after year, whether, going back to the Quentin Jeffersons of the world and, Mario Addison and now Von Miller and DaQuan Jones and Tim Settle and the other players who have been cycled through on the defensive line and the F.A. Obadas. And, I don't want to run down everybody, but there's been a lot of turnover and a lot of investment in this defensive line, which, again, is expected with how Sean McDermott and Brandon Beane believe in building from the defensive line out. But there really hasn't been overall group consistency. You've had several pillars and core guys, but there's been a lot of turnover and a lot of rotation year after year and them trying to find the right mix and the right balance. So I really want to see what this D-line looks like in action. Andrew says, how bad would Addison and Hughes have dropped off weeks 17 through 20 with higher snap counts? I don't know if you mean like if their numbers would have looked worse or if they would have looked worse. I don't think they were bad last year. I wish they got more sacks. But there's tape that speaks to the effectiveness of Jerry Hughes and Mario Addison. And if you look at, pass rush productivity, which, combines, the pressures and everything you generated against the quarterback relative to how many snaps you got, it changes perspective a little bit. Again, combining with seeing some things on tape, but who knows? And yes, Jason, Boogie did grab 55. He's wearing that Jerry Hughes. And yes, comment here from Ron. Shaq is a solid floor, 1,000%. Again, he's a known quantity. You know what you're going to get from him. You don't have that tremendously high ceiling. He's not going to come in and give you 12 to 15 sacks. But he's going to be solid against the run. He's going to do his job. He's going to do his 111th. He's going to give you quantity and some quality. He's going to have that limited upside overall, but he's a guy you can count on to do his job and do what is asked of him, which is valuable in some way, and not even in some way. Like it's readily available and valuable because you know what you're going to get out of a guy. And going back to what Frazier said about Groot and Boogie and AJ Epinesa, that they need consistency. That's the biggest thing they have to work on, and they need to know what they can expect from them every time they walk on the practice field and the game field, right? Shaq is the opposite. They know what they're going to get. They know the work ethic that he brings. They know what he's got going on in his head, and they know what he can do on the field. So very solid floor with that piece as well. Another person that Leslie Frazier spoke about was rookie first-round pick Kaiir Elam, corner out of the University of Florida. And I thought Frazier really hit some key points. So for those of you who don't know, OTAs, non-padded practices, based on the rules of the CBA, there is no contact. So you're really trying to reduce physicality at all points in OTAs. You're basically playing against air. And even when you're competing against someone else, it's very much like don't touch, don't collide. It's very much Arrested Development in the jail. No touching. That's what it is at all times. No touching. You want to reduce physicality at all costs. So you take a guy like Kaiir Elam, who, we've talked on this show and it's been talked about this offseason once he was drafted by the Bills. One of his strengths is that press man game, his ability to get up into a receiver's face at the line of scrimmage, play press, use that physicality and athleticism to his advantage. He can't do that thus far in OTAs because, again, they are OTAs and there's no pads and you have to reduce that physicality and reduce that contact. And Leslie Frazier was very, again, straightforward about the benefit of this for Kaiir Elam, talking about how Kaiir has the chance to grow his game because the rules are a little bit different during OTAs. And he, quote, gets the chance to learn how to play more off, which he didn't do a lot of at Florida, and be able to grow in that area. He also mentioned, again, some scheme parts and some structure pieces saying, corners in our system are not always lined up at the line of scrimmage. You got to be able to play some off coverage. So this is a good opportunity for him to grow in that area. And I think that's so spot on. If you look at Kaiir Elam's tape the last couple of years, yes, Jason said OTAs is like flag football a little bit, minus the flags. What's interesting with Kaiir Elam is when you see him in off coverage, again, off just meaning like the receiver is here and Kaiir Elam is back here. Presses, the receiver is here and Kaiir Elam is right up in his face. When Kaiir Elam has been in off coverage, both man and zone, he's shown an ability to understand how to leverage space and leverage the receivers and be able to function in that world. But it's good to see him operate, I guess, more outside of his comfort zone thus far in the offseason, because we know, again, we don't know what he can do at the NFL level in press man or press in general, but that's his wheelhouse. That's where he's more comfortable. So it's nice to know that he's getting kind of thrown into the deep end a little bit when it comes to the area that he is quote unquote weaker, or the area where he could use more work or more reps. Because again, like Leslie Frazier said, he didn't do a lot of off coverage at Florida. He was more of in that press life. And then Leslie Frazier also said two very important things about Kaiir Elam. He said one, which could be coach speak. He said, Kaiir Elam, quote, definitely sticks out. Talked about that. But then he also mentioned that we need Kaiir to, this is a direct quote, we need Kaiir to step up and play well for us early. I take that as in a vacuum just on Kaiir Elam. They're counting on Kaiir Elam. They're not discounting Dane Jackson. Leslie Frazier was also effusive in his praise of Dane Jackson. He called him one of the best young tackling corners in the league. Brandon Beane talked about him today, saying that he's a guy who, when someone's rung the bell, he's come out and answered questions, and he's answered the majority of those bells that have been rung. So we know they like Dane Jackson. But saying for Kaiir Elam that we need Kaiir to step up and play well for us early, I took that as connecting it to the Tre'Davious White piece. I've maintained this entire offseason. I expect Tre'Davious White to miss time at the beginning of the year. September, maybe a little bit of October, which isn't crazy. He just tore his ACL on Thanksgiving last year. So he tore his ACL at the end of November. I'm very comfortable with the notion or idea that you want to let him recover as properly as possible, and that means he may miss time in the regular season. In my mind, I'm already not including Tre'Davious White in the beginning of the year. I would like to. That it would be fantastic if, the Bills get to play the Rams week 1 with Cooper Kupp and Allen Robinson, and they have Tre'Davious White in that game. That would be splendid. I would really enjoy that. But I think we have to consider the idea of Trey not being ready for the start of the regular season. And when you hear a comment like that, again, Frazier could be talking about we need Kaiir to step up and play well for us early. That could be in general. With the quality of opponent and receivers the Bills are going to see in the early part of the year, you want that functional athleticism that Kaiir Elam brings. You want, like Ron mentioned in the comments earlier, you want that rock, paper, scissors ability that Kaiir Elam affords your defensive grouping because of his skill set, because of his traits. So they may just want him in general, right? But I think, it's hard not to connect the dots when it comes to Tre'Davious White playing in the early part of the year. And again, if he doesn't start week 1 or week 2 or week 3, or he doesn't come back until the middle of October, don't panic. You want to be as safe as possible with Tre'Davious White. He's an all-pro corner playing a premium position where your knee is very, very important. Constantly stop, starts, turns, plants, releasing. You need that knee to be solid. And more importantly, you need to have confidence that that knee is solid. I've had several knee injuries, several injuries in general in my playing career, my playing days. And anybody will tell you, if you're not confident in the health of that injury, no matter what it is, it changes how you play. It changes how you are in the game, because it's always in the back of your mind. Like, can I really go full tilt, or can I really make this play? Or how do I protect myself here? Do I got to watch out for this? You can't have that in the NFL. So give Trey as much time as he needs to recover and heal, come back to being 100%, which we don't even know what that's going to look like, because traditionally, the first year you come back from a torn ACL, you're really not back to your old self really until year 2, regardless of position. So even when Trey comes back, I don't want to say it's a long shot, but I think it's an unfair expectation to look at him and being like, well, once he comes back, he's good and he's back. he might not be playing at the level that we're used to seeing Tre'Davious White play. So the Bills are going to need Kyer Elam to be effective this year. They're going to need Dane Jackson to be effective as well. I think those are your two starting corners on day one. I think you're looking at Dane Jackson and Kyer Elam because I expect Tre'Davious White to miss some time based on the recovery for that knee. And honestly, I think that's the best course of action. Let him heal properly. Do not rush him back. You don't want to rush anyone back. And we know how much attention to detail the Bills pay when it comes to injuries and recovery and prevention and all of those things. They're they're on the up and up when it comes to everything with injuries and proper injury management and recovery and rehab and prevention. Again, everything. They're one of the leaders in the league when it comes to that. So they're going to take every precautionary measure they can. And I think that's to be expected. And I think that's the right move. And I think that's part of the reason why Leslie Frazier said we need Kyer Elam to step up and play well for us early, given what we may potentially see from Tre'Davious White in the early part of the year. Want to go to some comments. Roman here saying, yeah, I really don't care if we miss Trey for part of the regular season. Stick to the big picture. Exactly. You don't want to, I always mess up the saying, but what is it? You don't want to lose sight of the forest for the trees, where you get so focused on the details that you lose that big picture, right? And that's what it is. You really want to see that big picture. And another comment here from Roman. I'm going to grab the other one from your Roman too. Roman saying baptism by fire for Elam. And he gives us another wrinkle when Trey actually comes back. Roman also says Elam has a tendency to lock his hips too much, so learning more off should help him when he presses. I feel like, that athleticism, you see it get displayed regularly in press man. You see him be able, turn and run and have that fluidity. But, again, I think learning how to continue to leverage space at the NFL level and how to play off of routes when you're in off and the timing and being able to read routes, being able to read the quarterback, how your eyes need to be, how you can be looking this way, but you also need to use your peripherals at the same time. And again, the spacing, the footwork, everything. It's good for him to get all these reps right now in an area that he doesn't have a ton of experience in. So very, very encouraged by what Coach Frazier has said so far for Kyer Elam in OTAs. And Jason saying we need Trey back at 100%, not before that. Very well said. If I'm just making this up, I'm not saying he's going to be out this long, but if it was, Trey is not going to be 100% until December, cool. Then Trey's not playing until December. Do not lose the bigger picture. And I think this team is good enough to get by without Trey. I think Trey is needed to win a Super Bowl, though, much like I thought that last year. Now, they still should have gone to the AFC Championship, even without Tre'Davious White. But I think that game, I'm not being that guy and playing that card of, if Trey was in there against Kansas City, the Bills win. But I do think that game goes differently for the Bills defense if Tre'Davious White is in there. I don't think that's a shell-shocking comment. I don't think that is unique to me, but that's an absolute given. And you don't want to rush anyone back ever before they are ready, before they're 100%, especially somebody who's integral to the future of this team, not just 2022. Trey is one of the core foundational pieces for this team going forward. Josh Allen, Stephon Diggs, Tre'Davious White, those are your three workhorses. Those are your three pillars going forward for the future of this team. And it also helps that they're really good right now and they help you win right now. But they're tremendously important. You don't want to mortgage the future or rush anybody back. And I mean that in both ways. You don't want to mortgage the future of the season or mortgage the future of your franchise by running someone back too early. And yeah, so those are the comments from Leslie Frazier. And I mentioned Frazier again. He spoke on Gregory Rousseau. He spoke on Von Miller. He spoke on AJ Epinesa. And he spoke on Carlos Boogie Basham. And that's the next piece that we're going to get into here. The takeaways from the pressers from Carlos Basham, DaQuan Jones, and Tavon Austin. But I want to lead with the Carlos Basham presser. And it was mentioned here earlier in the chat. It was a bit disconcerting to hear what Carlos Basham said. So basically, for those of you who don't know, he was asked just a question of like, what was your biggest learning experience from last year? And he spoke to saying you got to bring it every week and how the NFL is way harder than most people think it is. And, some rookies might come in and think, oh, this is easy. But, he mentioned his biggest learning experience was you got to come in and bring it every single week, which implies that he did not bring it every single week. And we talked about this a little on the film room last night. Again, I don't think this is a death knell. This isn't terrible. This isn't like, oh my God, panic, ring the alarm. But it wasn't great to hear him say that, especially knowing that coming out, like one of the benefits of, or one of the strong attributes for Carlos Basham was how quote unquote, pro ready he is and how much of a high floor he has and the motor and the hustle that he has. And I think, to his credit, when he was in the game last year, you saw the effort, you saw the hustle, you saw the motor. But, if you're tying it in with what Coach Frazier said, again, about these three young guys saying that they need to know, the coaching staff needs to know what they can expect from those three guys every time they walk on the field and not be concerned how they're going to practice today or how they're going to perform in the game on Sunday. And then you hear Carlos Basham say something like that. I feel like it's fair to call in to question how he approached the season last year, whether weekly preparation, game preparation, performance, all that kind of stuff. For him to come out and say, my biggest learning experience was you got to bring it every week, and it's way harder than most people think it is. If that was his learning experience, fantastic. And if that's what he builds upon and that's what turns him into the player the Bills need him to be, awesome. Everybody learns somehow, some way, and that's fantastic. But it's a little concerning to know that he didn't already know that you got to bring it every week. Like that he didn't already know that the NFL is tremendously hard, that it was a learning experience for him in that regard is less than ideal. But if he learns from it, cool, that's fine. What I also think was very interesting, he talked about his playing weight last year. He was asked a couple questions about it. And because, he's come into this offseason and he's currently in the low 270s. And he said he focused on getting his weight down. He played at 285 pounds last year. And again, right now, he's currently in the low 270s. He was also asked a question about what weight did he play at in college. And he said in the high 260s, he said the high 265s and the low 270s, which again, if we're going to connect everything, I also find that very interesting. So you have a guy who in college was playing, we'll say between 265 and 272, something like that. But he was in the NFL at 285 last year. Some people might think, okay, because, the Bills wanted to kick him inside. They wanted to have that versatility. They wanted him to have a little more weight because they wanted to use him inside. The problem is the Bills didn't use him inside last year. The heavy majority of his snaps came on the edge. He played only 17 snaps, if I recall correctly, from our Carlos Basham film room breakdown. He only played 17 snaps on the interior last year. Now, maybe the initial plan for Carlos Basham from the coaching staff was we're going to play him inside, outside. And maybe by mid-year, it was like, you know what? We're not going to use him on the inside. We're just going to use him on the outside. And by that time, maybe it was too hard to cut weight. And so he was at 285. The plans changed. The course and direction changed a little bit. And so it was what it was. Now he gets the offseason. He gets down to the weight that was discussed with the coaching staff, and he is what he is. But it's very interesting to know that he played at a weight last year that he did not play at in college. And you also hear him talk about, you got to bring it each and every week. I wonder if there was some, work or shape issues with Carlos Basham last year in some way, shape, or form. And maybe that 285-pound playing weight wasn't by design from the coaching staff. Maybe it was because he wasn't performing and operating in a way that kept him in shape. And maybe he put on a couple extra pounds in that way. Again, I'm not completely saying that. I don't want to, call his work ethic completely into question, but I did see snaps at Wake Forest when I watched his tape when he was drafted, and even before he was drafted, where I looked at him and I thought, okay, is he gassed, or is there just a lack of effort on this play? Now, he played a ton of snaps at Wake Forest, so it was fair at that time for me to be like, well, he's probably gassed. He's been on the field the whole time. But now I connect the dots, and it's like, okay, if he wasn't bringing it each and every week at the NFL level, maybe, how many snaps did he take off at the college level? And then, he was playing at a significantly higher weight last year than he had throughout his college career. Why was he at that weight? Was it on him not doing what he needed to do, or was it by direction? The whole Carlos Basham piece has become, as Ron says here, I think he took plays off at Wake. I'm kind of leaning towards that as well, but again, we don't know for sure. I don't want to make accusations or assumptions like that about a player, especially something like work ethic, which I think is tied to character, and I don't want to call that into question for him. But I think that's fair to think that Basham was already on my radar coming into this year because, again, Someone needs to be that consistent edge presence. I appreciate you, Andrew. Andrew says, if anyone can call out effort, it's the workhorse. I appreciate you. I am the workhorse. Thank you. That's one of my favorite nicknames, just from I just think it's so funny and so stupid. But I appreciate you calling that out. The Bills need somebody opposite of Von Miller to be a consistent edge rushing presence, not just solid against the run, consistent pass rushing presence. Is it Gregory Rousseau? Is it AJ Epinesa? Is it Carlos Basham? Carlos Basham is big time on my radar already before this year even started because of the necessity of the position that he plays and the necessity of him to make a jump or someone to make a jump, or even if it's Shaq Lawson or it's Mike Love, whoever. The Bills need another consistent edge presence opposite of Von Miller. So Basham was already on the radar. Then he comes into camp significantly lighter, significantly leaner. And it's like, oh, okay, cool. The initial thought, before we heard this presser this week, my thought was, change in diet, just, adjusting to NFL life. You have your end of the year meetings with the coaching staff. They talk about, what they want from you this offseason and the direction going into next year. Boom, you go out, you execute. Same thing on the other side. Gregory Rousseau put on, he said, about 5 to 7 pounds of muscle. So you get that direction. You change your workout habits. You're in the NFL now. You understand what an offseason is like. It's common for guys to go up or go down in their weight as they get accustomed to NFL life, speak to their coaching staffs, and really engage with everything that's available to them. But now when you add it up with his playing weight last year and what he said about not bringing it every week and the comments from Leslie Frazier, I wonder what his work ethic and effort was last year, and if that weight was something more than just direction or scheme or thought process before the year started. And I think that's something to keep an eye on as we go forward. But what I do think speaks to his favor, and it's something I tweeted out last night, to lose that much weight. So again, he's in the low 270s, and which means he's below 275. So even if we play it, conservatively, and go devil's advocate with it, say he's 273, 274. He played at 285 last year. So he lost minimum 11 or 12 pounds between January and coming in here in June. So 6 months. That's harder than it seems. That takes a proper diet, a proper workout routine, and the focus and determination, all of those things. You have to be vigilant. You have to stay the course when it comes to your diet, your workout routine, everything. You have to have the mental fortitude to stay and stick to the plan and stick to the process, no pun intended. So the fact that he came in leaner and lighter, I think really speaks to that work ethic and that character that we heard about when he was coming out, that we heard he had at Wake Forest. And, when you see the motor on tape with the Bills, it's easy to think, well, this guy's like a high character, high work ethic, high effort type of guy. And so that calms some of the nerves and the worries. But again, it's all odd. You see a guy who hustles so much on the field with the Bills, but then he wasn't bringing it every week during that same season. And then he lost all this weight this year, and he was playing significantly heavier last year than he was in college. It's a very interesting time for Carlos Basham. He was already someone to watch for Bills Mafia. I think even more so now, given the oddities from his presser and connecting some of the dots with what you see on tape, with what Leslie Frazier said, and from, again, what Carlos Boogie Basham said himself. But again, huge feather in his cap, the fact that he lost that weight, that's tremendous. Anybody who's ever lost even 5 pounds, how hard it is to not only lose it, but then to continue to not put it back on. Big time feather in his cap for him to lose that weight. And as Jason says, it's also easier to lose that weight when you're young. Very fair. Very fair. It's a lot harder as you get older, but kudos to him for that work ethic. Someone who also spoke in pressers this week was free agent defensive tackle DaQuan Jones. I really enjoyed his presser. He opened up by speaking about Ed Oliver, talking about how special Ed Oliver is. And he said that his, quote, first step off the football is pretty crazy, which is something we know. Ed Oliver's get off and timing of the snap is just something really tremendous and really phenomenal. But then he went into depth talking about the defensive line a little bit. And he talked about how this defensive line is made up of guys who are, it's a jack of all trades on this defensive line. And that allows you to be more diverse in what you do. And when you have that diversity and depth up front, that helps you to be multiple and helps you to attack in a variety of ways. This goes to something I was talking about earlier in this episode when it comes to Shaq Lawson. I'm very interested to see what type of fronts the Bills defensive line uses this year. Traditionally, not to get too much into the weeds here for everyone, as this is kind of like a lighter, overarching theme episode here with OTAs. But overall, the Bills have been more of a over front on defense, which means 4 down linemen, and you have your defensive tackle to the strong side in a 3 technique, which basically means if you're looking at it like on the outside shoulder of the guard to the strong side of the formation. I'm wondering if they use different looks this year. I've been wondering it all offseason with the addition of DaQuan Jones and Tim Settle and Von Miller and bringing back Jordan Phillips and bringing back Shaq Lawson. Jordan Phillips, I think everybody knows Jordan Phillips if you're a Bills fan, but everybody's thinking of him still as that guy who, got a tremendous amount of sacks and was always cleaning up and was getting into the backfield. He played a little more run defense, a little more of a run defense role in his time at Arizona, and guy who was taking on more double teams and who was two-gapping a little more and who was standing strong at the point of attack. And so you add him, you add DaQuan Jones, who can two-gap all day from the interior. You add Shaq Lawson. You've got Gregory Rousseau, who has this strength and this length. You've got Von Miller. I'm very interested to see what the Bills do with their defensive fronts, because, again, traditionally they have been a 4-down line team over front. They'll mix in some other looks every now and again. But traditionally, we know what they've been. I'm very interested to see what they do because of what they can do, given the additions that they have up front. And I love that DaQuan Jones was already speaking about it. It's been something that's been on my mind. And the fact that he came right out and he could have said anything, talking about, they were like, oh, what do you think of this D-line? And he could just been like, man, great group of guys, love them, which he did for a little. But then he went into that depth and saying that it's a jack of all trades on this D line, and that they can be more diverse in what they do. And then they have that depth, which helps. I wonder if that's already been something that they've been working on in terms of their fronts and in terms of roles and responsibilities, because you've got guys who can wear multiple hats. You've got guys who can function in a variety of alignments on that defensive line, which gives you more options to do what? Play rock, paper, scissors against your opponent. And with those different alignments, with those different fronts, you can play different schemes and different games with your defensive line to take advantage and expose and attack weaknesses in your opponent's offensive line, right? And instead of just coming out in your standard formation, okay, we're going to run a 4-3 and we're running this coverage behind it, and this is what our front four is doing. And, we'll show blitz every once in a while, or we'll run a creeper or simulated pressure here and there. Maybe they go off the beaten path a little bit. We know that the Bills staff is very big into self-scouting and course correcting and moving forward. And as I take a drink of water here, we know from what Leslie Frazier said in his presser this week about how you have to always be looking forward and you have to always get better and you have to always adjust. There are some fronts and some looks that the Bills defense can employ in order to get better as a unit, to be more versatile, to be more multiple, to be able to continue to operate in that vein of rock, paper, scissors. So I'm very excited to see, some of that already being talked about by a new guy nonetheless in DaQuan Jones. The fact that he came in, and it's not like it's a guy who's been here and just is talking about regular things. It's a new guy who's coming in. And it's like, oh, what's your first thought? It's just like, man, like everything is so versatile and we can be so diverse in what we do. And we have all this depth. Very, very excited for that. And I also like what DaQuan Jones said about defensive line coach Eric Washington. He talked about how Coach Washington coaches everyone in the room and makes sure everyone has the details. He said, you'll be on other teams and you'll see other guys where the coaches only coach the top guys or the first round picks or the high draft picks. But here, Coach Washington coaches up everyone to make sure everyone has a holistic understanding. And I thought that really spoke to overall the culture and the peace that we see with this Bills team, what we continue to hear about. And the last nugget from DaQuan Jones, this was maybe my favorite quote from OTAs this week. Somebody asked him, how do you work on your run fits and defending the run in OTAs when, you don't have pads on, you can't touch anyone. And DaQuan Jones came out and said, quote, stopping the run is all mental. And I love that because run fits, this is something we're probably going to dive into as a full episode here in Disguise coverage this offseason. Run fits are hard. Fitting the run is hard. Stopping the run is hard. Having your gap and having someone else have their gap and making sure you can maintain integrity in functioning in that gap is hard. gap exchanges that happen. There's so much, again, I don't want to get too much into the weeds of it now, but stopping the run is a lot harder than it seems. It's one of the reasons why, Tremaine Edmonds, I think, gets so much flack because people are like, well, how come he didn't make that play? And it's because there's not that level of understanding when it comes to what his role and responsibility was. And maybe he wasn't supposed to make that play. Maybe that wasn't his responsibility. And you're blaming him for a play that happened that wasn't his fault. And recognizing that, what's being asked of a player is there's different levels. Like, well, so-and-so made that play because their job is easy versus so-and-so's job is tremendously hard. And a lot of it ties into that run fit piece. And the mental side is so huge. You need everybody to be seeing the same thing, reading the same thing, and reacting in the same way and almost at the same time. So that way you can all flow together, plug up all and any potential gaps from the offense and stop everything in its tracks. It's hard. Again, I want to spend probably a full episode on it this offseason, but I love that DaQuan Jones already came in and someone's like, oh, how do you practice against the run if, there's no pads, you can't be physical. And he was like, stopping the run is all mental. You need to know how to fit the run. You need to know what your assignment is and how to execute it and what happens if you have to adapt and adjust on the fly. Very smart guy, very heady guy. He answered some fluff questions too, but there were a lot of nuggets of detailed information and important takeaways from DaQuan Jones, and I really love what he dove into. And again, I think it ties into what we could see from this Bills defensive grouping. I think the additions the Bills made to this defensive line this offseason weren't just, well, we let some guys go, so we got to bring some guys in. I think the guys they brought in was for a specific pinpointed reason. And I think we're going to see a variety of fronts and alignments from the Bills defensive line this year in order to take advantage of some of the trends that have been taking the NFL defensive world by storm over the last couple of years so that they can combat the run and the pass at the same time and maybe potentially do it better than they have the last several years. So already hearing some of those pieces from DaQuan Jones got me really, really excited. Wanted to go, before we talk on Tavon Austin, wanted to go back to some of the comments coming here from Brian saying the defense has never been built to need a stud player. They are a team defense and is why we can afford to let players fully hear. Awesome. Taking that back to the Tre'Davious White comment, which is also, again, why it's exciting now because they are a team defense, but now you're a team defense with a stud in Von Miller, a stud potentially coming back in Tre'Davious White, two studs at safety in Micah Hyde and Jordan Poyer, a budding stud in Ed Oliver. Man, if you can add studs and stars to a team defense, very exciting. Very, very, very exciting. Comment from Jason. Yes, Buffalo needs to integrate man-to-man and not just zone all the time. They played more man than I think people realize last year in 2021. But it's also like, I think a lot of it for me is what they do on the back end and knowing, okay, if we're playing man, is it straight up man? Is it cover zero? Is it cover one? Okay, there's only one safety back there. Who do they have to help? Who do they have to shade to? Because right, if you're sitting there and it's Tre'Davious White and Levi Wallace, no disrespect to Levi Wallace, the safety's probably going to shade to the Levi Wallace side, right? Or there's some man-to-man matchups that you don't want Levi Wallace in, just like you don't want Dane Jackson in them. Kyrie Elam's skill set and his traits allow you to fight fire with fire a little more confidently when it comes to those man-to-man matchups. So very fair, very fair. Comment from Brian. Yeah, Basham's statement from him may explain why about Frazier's shout out on impact plays. No show, no job. Again, yeah, I think it's very interesting that Basham said that. And, Frazier also made his comment saying, you need to be able to you need to know what you can expect from these guys every time they step on the field. Because he also, again, Frazier mentioned it wasn't just in the games. Frazier didn't just say, you need to know what you can expect from them on game day. He specifically said you need to not be concerned how a guy's going to practice today or how he's going to perform in the game on Sunday. That means there are players, which again isn't crazy because young guys have to adjust in the NFL, right? But those young guys, and he said this right after talking about Groot and AJ and Boogie, and he said this in reference to them. That means they had questions as a coaching staff about how these guys were showing up to practice every day, which is even more concerning. It's one thing, right, to not execute on Sundays. Sometimes it's not going to happen. Sometimes you get beat. Sometimes the other team has a better game plan. Sometimes, it's just not in the cards for you. Just like basketball, sometimes your shot just doesn't fall. It is what it is. But there's a big difference in executing on Sunday versus practicing properly during the week to allow you to succeed on Sundays. So they have question marks about what these guys are going to be each day in practice. And then again, you pair it together with Basham's comments about, bringing it every week and the weight comments, and it's all just very, very interesting and, makes for an interesting storyline as we move through this offseason here. Bam, 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 bam. Anything else? Brian here is saying that AFC East is building up to run the ball because they have limited passers, and the Bills D is ready for this plan. Ooh, I take that. Oh, question here from Roman. Roman asks, do you think Elam will already be better as a rookie than Levi Wallace was in his final years here? Just curious. I'd love to say yes. I'm not going to yet, just because, and honestly, it's not because of Kaiir Elam. I would say that for any rookie. I don't care who the rookie is. If you do not have any proven production in the NFL, you cannot come out and say that, yeah, this rookie's going to be better than this other guy. I'll always go back to being a kid and hearing how Ryan Leaf and Peyton Manning were going to be the next generation of great quarterbacks. And it didn't matter that the Colts took Peyton Manning first because the Chargers also got a great one in Ryan Leaf. And I remember all the drama leading up to that draft of who's going to go number one because they're both so amazing. And Ryan Leaf was not. He was dealing with a lot of off the field things. You just never know what someone is going to turn into as a pro. So I'm not going to say that and put that expectation onto Kaiir Elam that he'll already be better as a rookie than Wallace was in his final years. And also, I don't want to disrespect Levi. I wanted the upgrade from Levi. I wanted more scheme versatility on the back end and the ability to play more coverages with more confidence in a variety of ways against a variety of receivers and opponents. But Levi was a solid 2. He was, like I've said, that proverbial guy who was always in the right place at the right time. He was responsible. He gave you a high floor. You knew what you were going to get. He wasn't the biggest. He wasn't the strongest. He wasn't the fastest. He wasn't the longest corner, but he was a good corner. And whether it was in the scheme or just because of who he is, he was a good corner for the Bills. And Elam has a lot to live up to fill those shoes of Levi Wallace. And yes, he has that skill set that can take, his ceiling much higher and allow him to play at a higher level and really unlock things for this Buffalo Bills defense. But as of right now, I'm not ready to say that Elam will be better as a rookie because we've never seen Elam play, a down in the NFL. So we don't know. And as good as he's looked in OTAs, he could be terrible when the season starts because that's how it works with rookies. The draft is a crapshoot. If it wasn't, every team would hit on every rookie. So we'll see. Awesome comment here from Jason. Ryan Leaf had too many personal demons. Glad he worked his way through those. He really has, and he's become, a success story now in the path that he's on. So yeah, major claps and kudos to Ryan Leaf and, the journey that he's been on. Last player presser I wanted to talk about. Tremaine Edmonds spoke a little bit, but he spoke again in a lot of generalities and just a lot of coach speak, and I wasn't feeling it too much. I came away really impressed with Tavon Austin, a journeyman who was taken in the draft where the Bills got EJ Manuel. The Rams traded up to number 8 to take Tavon Austin, came out of West Virginia running a 4.34 40. Lightning fast, so tremendously impressive at West Virginia and in high school. If you're ever bored, go down the rabbit hole or just go to YouTube, not now because you're watching this show. Go and type in Tavon Austin high school highlights. He is one of those guys whose highlight tape is just so tremendously impressive. And then he operated that way also at West Virginia. And things didn't pan out for him in the NFL. A lot of it was due to injuries, which he spoke about at this presser, but he was electric in high school and electric coming out of college and was such a fun player from a potential perspective when he was coming out. Took a little higher than I think a lot of people thought he should have been, but the speed and the electricity spoke to the Rams and they took him. But he very, very honest in his assessment of himself at the presser yesterday and talking about his journey as a player and what he's overcome and what he's faced with and what he's looking for here in Buffalo. And he talked about how, a lot of places you go to different teams it doesn't always feel like home. And I'm going to pull up the direct quote because I tweeted it earlier and I want to make sure I pulled it out here as we go. Yeah. So Tavon Austin was asked, how he likes being in Buffalo, and he says he's loving it. His time so far in Buffalo, and he said, "quote One of the main reasons why I love it. When you go to certain organizations, everybody don't make you feel like home. So when I first came here, everybody definitely made me feel like that." He said all the right things, but it didn't just seem like general coach speak. I'm rooting for Tavon Austin. I loved his presser, like from him as like a person and what he talked about. Again, overcoming all the injuries. And there's been a lot. He's had hamstring injuries, concussions, wrist injuries, which he spoke about. He said he took a couple years off from returning punts because his wrist was messed up and he couldn't really field punts. But now his wrist is all good. He had surgery on that wrist. He's all ship shape. He said this, he feels healthy. He hasn't felt like this in a long time. He feels like he can get back to his old self. I'm excited for what Tavon Austin could bring in. Again, if you have some time, watch his college highlights, watch his high school highlights, watch his presser from this week. About 8 minutes. It was really insightful, and he seems like an easy person to root for. And again, from an on-field perspective, if he's still got some juice in those wheels, if he's still got some electricity, could be a fun piece. I think he's got an uphill battle and an uphill climb to make when it comes to seeing action on the actual offense. You've got to compete with Crowder and Isaiah McKenzie and Khalil Shakir. It's going to be tough to get into that slot world, but maybe he functions in more of a gadgetry piece. He can take some snaps out of the backfield, and he offers you a variety of things. I think the main way he could potentially contribute is in the return game. He's got that electricity. He's got that decision making. So I'm interested to see again what he could be on this team. And, I think he was brought in more as depth and competition and a camp body. And Brandon Beane basically said that when he talked about in his presser about the addition of Tavon Austin. But you never know. Sometimes teams take a flyer on a guy and that guy turns out to be something more than they initially thought he could be. And, Tavon, again, his presser was really insightful in terms of just him really breaking down all the injuries he's had and how it limited him and what it was like for him coming out and being drafted and how things have changed and where he is now in his career and what he thinks of the Buffalo Bills offense, which was also very interesting. He said, quote, "This is the most difficult offense I've been in. And it's an offense where it's, quote, it's all about your mental game." He talked about just the multitude of possibilities on every play for a receiver and how you can be in so many different spots and where you can go and what you have to do. And he talked about how complicated this offense is and how important the understanding of this offense is in the mental side and being able to fully understand it. And the smarter you are, the better that you'll play, which again is, I think, pretty standard for a lot of players. Usually the smarter you are, the better you'll do, especially in something that has more complications to it. But he just seemed a lot of his responses very poignant, both about himself, about the city of Buffalo, and about this team and about this offense. So really fun and interesting presser from Tavon Austin, somebody who it's an interesting flyer and camp body. Especially again, I think for me, the Bills have questions at returner right now. I'm not confident in Isaiah McKenzie at all. I don't know what we're going to get from Marquez Stevenson. Does Khalil Shakir get some snaps at returner? How does Tavon Austin do? Very interesting as we move forward into camp. And that return game is a nice segue to the last topic here on this episode. Special teams coordinator Matthew Smiley, who honestly might be the most genuine and wholesome person I've ever heard speak at a presser in my life. I don't even want to elaborate too much on it. Just watch his presser and he just seems like the most wholesome, genuine guy. But in the return game, as we dive into some of the things Matthew Smiley said, I thought was very interesting. And I hadn't even thought of it. You've got this punter competition between Matt Hawk and Matt Ariza. But what Smiley talked about was the benefit that has for the returners, because 2 punters means you've got twice the amount of live leg work for the returners. So you've got constant reps and constant opportunities for all these guys who are trying to prove their worth as punt returners. So maybe the odds are in Tavon Austin's favor a little bit because he comes to a team that has a punting competition and you're going to get all those extra reps. You're going to get all those extra looks to impress and potentially show your worth and show what you can do. And one thing that really hit me, this was my favorite takeaway, maybe from OTAs all week. The the way that the special teams staff evaluates when they're looking at their holders. So Matthew Smiley was asked what he looks for in someone holding, and he said during their field goal portions at practice, they have a handheld ground level camera that's set extra frame rate slower so they can watch everything click by click. And he's looking for a clean catch. Did the holder hit the spot? What kind of lean is he given for Tyler Bass to make the kick? But that level of technology, like I didn't even know that was a thing, a handheld ground level camera that they set to be extra frame rate slower so they can watch the hold happen click by click. So they can see exactly where your hands are before you catch it, how you catch the ball, where you put it down, what the rhythm is, what the timing is, when are you putting it down and where is Tyler Bass in relation to you putting the ball down. Just that level of detail was something that I didn't know even existed. And I thought that was tremendously, cool to learn that and see what they're using with technology for something as not insignificant to me, but something that's quote unquote insignificant, like the holding job. And overall, Matthew Smiley talked multiple times about the culture of competition. He led off talking about Matt Ariza and Matt Hawk, and they're getting even reps right now. They're at 50-50. And he talked about, nothing being handed to anyone, your general coach speak, but he also mentioned some really cool points on Matt Ariza. Talked about how Matt Ariza lacks experience, but he's got a natural gift with his strong left leg. But the biggest thing for Ariza was that he has a mindset of constant improvement that Matthew Smiley saw show throughout the entire season, throughout the offseason, at the combine and his pro day. So he talked about how throughout the year and throughout each phase of the offseason, he saw constant improvement in Matt Ariza. So as the 2021 season went through, he got better throughout that season. And then in the offseason, he got better from his combine to his pro day. Each time he saw him, Ariza was fixing things, and he has that mindset of constant improvement. And that's such a culture piece, right? That's such a processy piece for the Bills. Like the culture of competition and the mindset of constant improvement. Like if that was tattooed on Sean McDermott's ribs or bicep, I would not be surprised. Mindset of constant improvement. That's how Matt Ariza operates. That just screams process. That screams Sean McDermott. Like that just speaks to what the Bills look for. And again, that competition piece, he talked about Matt Hawk, and the reporters asked, about what he thought of Hawk's performance last year. And he didn't give him a pass, but he talked about the multitude of bad weather games that the Bills played in, both on the road and at home. And he spoke to, how good Matt Hawk is and how he's statistically better than what he showed. And again, you're not going to come right out and say, well, no, we're going to give the job to this guy. Or no, we drafted this punter, so this guy's clearly going to get the job. But I genuinely don't think it's as cut and dry as a lot of people make it out to be, where it's just Matt Ariza's job and Matt Hawk isn't going to do anything. And as Brian says here, all this hype on the holding for Bass actually makes me fear that Hawk will win that job. Hawk was a liability when we needed him to flip the field. The biggest problem with Matt Hawk was just the inconsistency. He would boom like a 47-yard punt, and you'd be like, whoa, what a kick, amazing. And then he'd come out next time and hit like a 17-yard shank that you were just like, oh, dude, like it was too much roller coaster. It was too much up and down. What he does have over Matt Ariza, though, and we spoke about this a little last week, he has the hang time. Matt Ariza, again, though, Ariza's still learning. He lacks experience, like Coach Smiley said, but his hang time has never been there. He averaged throughout his college career a hang time of 3.8 seconds, which is about a half second slower than you'd like it to be. So he's consistently out driving and out kicking Matt Hawk left and right every day in practice. But Hawk is winning the hang time battle, whether it's with the wind, whether it's into the wind, anything you're seeing like that. So you hope that Ariza can fix that hang time piece, because it's equally important. I know the distance is what gives him the punt god nickname and what everybody likes to talk about. But that hang time piece is just as important. You don't want to just be out there booming kicks and out kicking your coverage and giving the returner an opportunity and space to potentially make a big return and change the field position and negate some of that, booming punt that you just let off. So that hang time piece is important, and Matt Hawk has the advantage in that category right now. He also has the advantage in the holding area of the job. So I think it's a legit competition at this point. I do expect Matt Ariza to win the kicking competition from the punting perspective. I am of the belief that if you draft a punter, if you draft a specialist, I think that's going to be your guy going forward. And especially just with those glaring inconsistencies we saw from Matt Hawk last year, it was just really, really rough. But Ariza still has things to work on, not booming it too far and, losing field position because of touchbacks, and the hang time piece is the big one, and, the directional kicking and little things like that. But again, he's green, he's raw. He's got a ton of talent. He's got a super strong left leg like Matthew Smiley talked about. So that's something to keep an eye on for that camp competition and the preseason competition between Hawk and Ariza. So, maybe we want to see more punts come preseason so we can get a live look at these guys. Also, something that I thought was tremendously insightful from Matthew Smiley. He talked about, the role of a special teams coach and the special teams coordinator in relation to the offensive and defensive coordinators, because an awesome comment here from Brian. Brian says, I love Smiley. He's so high energy and yet still remains focused on the details in his approach. Looking forward to some awesome special teams this year. Me too, Brian. And one of the details, to piggyback on your comment, one of the details he spoke about that I was really, I guess was insightful to me, he talked about, because special teams, a lot of your guys are on defense and offense. You have to share those players with the other coaches. And so he talked about, as a special teams coordinator, it's not just the management of the 53-man roster, but of the game day actives, and how the inactives and actives is a big deal to special teams, because, again, you have to share guys with the offense and the defense. So if you've got guys who are being declared active or inactive, it changes. It may not change, you hear like, oh, Tavon Jones is inactive today, or Zach Moss is inactive today, or, anybody. And you're like, well, they were like the fourth string guy, so whatever, it doesn't matter. That affects Matthew Smiley. Daryl Johnson was a big guy for special teams. I think if Daryl Johnson would have been a game day inactive, most fans would be like, well, he was like the sixth defensive end. He's not going to play. It doesn't matter. But he plays a ton on special teams. And so you've got those guys who are down the depth chart for offense and defense, but they're at the top of the depth chart for special teams. And Matthew Smiley, again, talked about that. It's not just the management of the 53-man roster, but it's the management of the game day actives list, and how you share players with the other coaches, because, you've got your offensive guys. Your starters on offense are your starters on offense. Like, they're yours. Your starters on defense, those are Leslie Frazier's guys. You don't got to worry about that. Like, Tre'Davious White is a corner. He's Leslie Frazier's. Stephon Diggs is a wide receiver. He's Ken Dorsey's. If you're, Matthew Smiley, how many guys do you really have that are yours? Taiwan Jones, Tyler Medikevich, maybe Tyrell Dodson, everyone else, and then you have your specialists, the Bass and the Smileys and Reed Ferguson. But a lot of your other guys are coming from other units. So you have to share those players, and then you have to have adjustments if those guys have to be used more on offense or defense, and it changes your actives, it changes your inactives, it changes the way you have to form and function with your group, because you're sharing those players. You don't have as many guys that are holistically yours. Your 11 starters on defense are your 11 starters on defense. Pretty much the same thing for your offense as well on both sides of the ball. But your 11 starters on special teams, only a handful are really yours as the special team coach. So that relationship and that rapport with the other coordinators and formulating who's starting and who's active on game day, it affects special teams tremendously, because it causes a ripple effect and a chain reaction down the depth chart, which impacts and influences who you are playing on special teams and who plays that day. And Joey's comment here, yeah, Neal and Andre Smith are shared players 1,000%, but they're not functioning like, Saran Neal and Andre Smith aren't asked to, they're not getting a lion's share of starter snaps. It's not the same as, Taron Johnson and Tremaine Edmonds, or Taron Johnson and Matt Milano, something like that. The Saran Neal and Andre Smith, they're shared players, but they're not starters who are seeing like real minutes on defense. They're more special teamers than they are defensive players, but they still might get some work here and there. Saran Neal much more than Andre Smith. But yeah, it influences your decision-making and how you build that team and that group out on a week-to-week basis. And I thought that was a very interesting and insightful piece from Mr. Matthew Smiley. And then the last piece, he talked about his philosophy, which is, quote, fast, smart, juice. And that means guys should feel free like they can run. They got to play smart and know the game plan and the rules. And then they're out there to run and hit and make plays. And that's what juice is. And I just thought fast, smart, juice was a really cool way to say that guys should be able to play free, know what they're doing, and run around and hit people and play fast, which is a cool philosophy. Again, tremendously wholesome and genuine dude, special teams coordinator Matthew Smiley, new to the role after Heath Farwell departed from Buffalo this past offseason. And Smiley was also a really cool, confident cat when asked about, what would you have changed in the Chiefs game? And would you say that there wasn't proper communication and where was the disconnect and this and that? He deflected questions that he didn't want to answer really well, but he was also forthcoming in the details and the points of his role and the players and the team. So another very interesting watch and dive into a presser from, special teams coordinator Matthew Smiley. And again, a unit that I always think is important. It's 1/3 of the football game. Bad special teams can 1,000% ruin a good game from your defense and or your offense and cause you to lose. And, not just to harp on it because it's one of the most relevant things and most recent things we've seen for the Buffalo Bills, but, a lack of execution on special teams was, one of several factors that led to the 13 seconds debacle in the divisional round against Kansas City. So never forget about special teams and feel confident in the stewardship of special teams coordinator Matthew Smiley. And we start to wind down here. That's going to start to do it for us here on this episode of Disguise Coverage. I hope you enjoyed this episode. I want to thank everybody who rode with me here. As always, the chat was engaging. The questions, the thoughts, the comments, concerns, the back and forth, you guys with each other and with me. I say it every week because I appreciate the hell out of it every single week. Thank you so much for joining me and not making me do this show completely by myself. Thank you very much. I appreciate you guys. If you are still here, while you're still here, please drop a like on this video. I know it's corny to say that. I know it's corny to say that it's corny like I do every week, but it goes a long way towards helping myself and my entire team to track and trend in front of more eyes and ears. So please drop a like on this video. Please subscribe to the Disguise Coverage channel. Oh, appreciate you, Joey. Joey saying he definitely enjoyed it and that I got a smooth style. Appreciate you, Joey. Mad respect for that. Thank you very much. Thank you for stopping by. Yeah, subscribe to Disguise Coverage. Subscribe to Cover One as a whole. We got you covered every single day of the week when it comes to anything and everything Buffalo Bills. Then you've got some more overall football knowledge and things mixed in like myself. I dive into as many X's and O's and hows and whys to help, everybody understand the game more and, be able to understand it more from a fan's perspective so you can enjoy the game better. That's, one of my overall goals. And we got you covered like that on the entire team at Cover One. If you were listening to this episode on anywhere in the podcasting apps or platforms, please rate and review, drop a 5-star review. Please subscribe on the podcasting apps and platforms if, the apps are your thing and you're more of an audio person instead of a visual guy. If you're watching later on YouTube, drop a like. That's cool. Tell all your family and friends and loved ones about how awesome this show is. Or if you thought this show was terrible, tell your enemies and try and ruin their day, by making them listen or watch this show. Any press is good press. But regardless, I appreciate you guys very much for stopping by and joining me on this episode of Disguise Coverage, focusing on the Buffalo Bills OTAs in week 3. If there was anything I did not get to in this episode, question, thought, comment, anything that you had, get at me on Twitter. Again, at pro__ANT, pro 2 underscores ant. That is the best way to get at me. Tweet at me, DM me, whatever have you. I try to answer anything and everything on Twitter. And I think I get to mostly everything. There's some days where I don't, but I'm very active there. As it comes with the territory, it comes with the job. And I appreciate you guys. I hope you and your family and friends and loved ones all take care of each other. I hope you're all doing well and staying safe. I will see you next week for another episode of Disguise Coverage. And as always, go Bills.